Hi and welcome. So in this video we're going to develop the aggregate supply aggregate demand model, which is our chapter 7 of our macroeconomics 2 module. So in chapter 5 we looked at the determination of output in the short run, and in chapter 6 we looked at the determination of output in the medium run. So we are now ready to put the two together and look at the determination of output in both the short run and the medium run. So to do so, we use the equilibrium conditions for all the markets we have looked at so far. The goods and the financial market in chapter 5 and the labor market in chapter 6. Then using these equilibrium conditions, we derive two relations. First, we derive an aggregate supply relation, which captures the implication of the equilibrium in the labor market. So in this, we build on what we saw in chapter 6. The second relation, which we call the aggregate demand relation, captures the implication of equilibrium in both the goods market and the financial market. So we build from what we saw in chapter 5. So combining these two relations gives us the ASAD model, which stands for aggregate supply aggregate demand model. This chapter presents the basic version of the model. So when we are confronted with macroeconomic questions, this is the version we typically use to organize our thoughts and bring our thoughts together. However, for some questions, this basic ASAD model must be extended. For instance, if we want to focus on the behavior of inflation or understand the role of financial systems in the current crisis. However, it does provide a base through which we can build, and this is what we shall basically be looking at in the next coming two chapters. So firstly, we're going to look at the aggregate supply relation. The aggregate supply relation captures the effects of output on the price level. It is derived from the behavior of the wage and the price determination we saw in chapter 6. So from chapter 6, just to have a brief recap, we derive the wage determination as wages being a function of expected price and also unemployment and catch-all variables. So nominal wages set by wage setters depend on expected prices and on unemployment or negative loan unemployment and positive loan catch-all variables. We also derive the price determination as price being a function of 1 plus markup times wages. So this told us that the price set by firms is equals to nominal wages times 1 plus the markup. We then use the two relations together with the assumption that actual price level was equals to expected price level. So under this assumption, we derive the natural level of unemployment and by implication the natural level of output. So the difference in this chapter, we drop this assumption and work with the narrative that price level is not equals to expected price level. However, we'll see that in the medium run, price level is actually equals to the expected price level and not in the short run. So without this additional assumption, the price setting relation and the wage setting relation gives us a relation between actual prices, expected prices, and output. So first, from the price setting relation, let's eliminate the nominal wages by replacing it with the expression of the wage setting relation. So if we do so, if we replace this nominal wage function by its expression of the wage setting relation. This is what we get. So this equation basically tells us that price level depends on expected prices, on unemployment rate, as well as the markup and catch-all variables, the Z. The second part is to replace unemployment rate with its expression in terms of output. So remember we said we can use this equation to move from unemployment rate to output, suggesting that for every unemployment rate or every natural unemployment rate, there is an implied output. So the first part of this equation, as a reminder, follows from the definition of unemployment rate. So unemployment rate is basically the ratio between unemployed and labor force. So the second part follows from the determination of unemployment. So labor minus employment is equals to unemployment. So the third part, this one, is basically us simplifying the fraction. So because we said from our production function n is equals to 1, then we concluded that we can show the relationship between unemployment using the relation between employment and output. So given that unemployment rate is given by 1 minus output over labor force, we can then substitute this unemployment in our price function equation, therefore giving us this new equation, which is basically our aggregate supply relation. So this equation basically tells us that the price level depends on the expected price level and on the level of output, and also on markup, catch-all variables, and the labor force. So for simplicity, we assume that the markup, the catch-all variable Z, as well as the labor force are constant to basically explore the relationship between price, expected price, and output. So given that M, Z, and L are constant, the aggregate supply relation basically tells us that price level depends on expected price level and output. Okay, so the AS relation has two basic important properties. So property number one, so given the expected price level, an increase in output leads to an increase in actual price level. So this is due to basically on the sequence of events that we looked at in chapter 6. So just to recap, so how does this happen? So an increase in output leads to an increase in employment. So an increase in employment leads to a decrease in unemployment, and therefore to a decrease in unemployment rate. So the lower unemployment rate leads to an increase in nominal wages because of the bargaining power narrative we spoke about in chapter 6. So the increase in wages leads to an increase in the price set by firms, and therefore to an increase in the price level, which is the actual price level. So the second property is that given unemployment rate, an increase in the expected price level leads 1-for-1 to an increase in actual price level. So how does this happen? So for instance, if expected price level double, then price levels will also double. This effect works through the wage setting. So for instance, if wage setters expect price levels to be higher, they set higher nominal wages. The increase in nominal wages leads to an increase in the cost of production, which leads to an increase in the price set by firms, and therefore a higher price level. Okay, so we can re-emphasize these two properties. So one, given an expected price level, an increase in output leads to an increase in the price level. And property number two, so given unemployment, an increase in the expected price level leads one-to-one to an increase in actual price level. So we can now use these properties to derive the AS curve. So the AS curve is upward sloping, which shows an increase in output that leads to an increase in the price level. So this tells us that the aggregate supply curve tells us that there's a positive relationship between price and output. So the aggregate supply curve goes through a point in the equilibrium where output is equal to the natural level of output. The price level is exactly equal to the expected price level. So when output is above the natural level of output, the price level tends to be higher than expected. So an increase in the expected price level shifts the AS curve up. Let's look at this. So this curve represents the AS curve, which the upward sloping indicates the positive relationship between price and output. So output is an increasing function of price, or an increase in output leads to an increase in price. So at equilibrium, output is equal to the natural level of output, and therefore price is equal to expected price. So in the case where output is greater than the natural level, this means that price level is also greater than expected price. And the opposite is also true, meaning that when output is less than its natural level, then actual price is less than expected prices, or it's less than its expectation. So an increase in expected price shifts the AS curve upwards, as shown here. So how does this happen? So an increase in expected price level from here to the upwards at a given level of output and a corresponding unemployment rate lead to an increase in nominal wages, which lead to an increase in prices. So that's where that relation between output and price is based. Okay, so starting from the wage determination and the price determination in the labor market, we have derived the aggregate supply relation. So the relation implies that for a given expected price level, the price level is an increasing function of the level of output. It is represented by the upward sloping aggregate supply curve. So an increase in the expected price shifts the aggregate supply curve up, as indicated here. So this decreases the expected price level, or rather a decrease in expected price level will shift this curve to the opposite direction, downwards. All right, we've come to an end of the first part of our chapter 7. Thank you.